Is there?
Okay, you're on. The TV wasn't on.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. We've had a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 No nays. No nays. It's unanimous. All right. Now we go to review and discussion of the proposed budget for the sewer fund. And Dave?
Madam Chair, committee members, up on the projection screen, you have a PDF version of this, and basically what I want to do is just start out and give you a real high-level overview. This is what we're going to be asking you to approve. So start at the 40,000-foot view, kind of explain how the spreadsheet's laid out and what it means, and then focus in on the specific area to the financial policies, and that's all included in here. When you look at the whole spreadsheet as a whole, there's a lot of numbers in there. And what we tried to do was show you what we're looking at in some future years, just kind of show where we're thinking so that we can talk about how we're meeting those financial policies, as the phase-in starts. So we'll start with the sewer. And on the sewer side here, you can see that up here, this is just one of the rows, and I'll talk about this, but this is our current budget cycle. So it's the 2014-15 budget. We're going to start high-level overview with beginning cash. I'm going to get into more detail as we go, but I just want to give you the high-level overview. So here's our beginning cash. We take our total operating revenues minus the total expenditures, and that's going to give us either a net income or a loss. In this case, it shows a net income. You take the net income plus the beginning balance, and that's going to give you an ending operating balance. So that's looking at the operating side, and I'm going to expand those and talk about what each one of those are in just a minute, but just high level. And then looking at the capital side, the same concept holds true. Within the capital, you have a beginning capital budget and an ending capital budget, and I'm going to expand what's all involved in each one of those. And then you take your ending capital balance and your ending operating balance, and that gives you your total cash balance for that fiscal year. So that's just high-level overview. I'll talk about each one of these a little bit, break out some more information. You can see your operating revenues are made up of your rate revenues, other revenues, and interest income. Looking at operating expenses, major categories are salaries and benefits, services and supplies, other expenditures, and transfer to capital. Now, you'll see this transfer of capital down here. It'll show up in here, but it comes in, in a pot of money. We transfer it from operating to capital. You'll see that same transfer happening. When you look at your capital side, same concept here. We add in the connection charges, any money received from grants or to the developer, federal interest subsidy, bond, and then interest income and transfer from operating. So there you see that transfer from operating. Those are the same numbers. We're just moving it into the capital side of things. And then, of course, you subtract out your debt service, your bond issuance cost, your equipment or vehicles, and capital projects. And that leaves you with an ending fund balance for the capital side. Where this plays into is where this committee looks at is the financial policies. How does this align to the financial policies? And I'll expand these three areas. I'll focus in on these areas because this is where it's going to make the most sense. And down here, really where the focus of this committee lies, because it's going to show us where we're trying to attain our financial policies. And what we have is we have 5 policies. The fiscal policies were in your packet. We can go over them, but basically we talked about operating reserves. This section right here is called established goals for reserve amounts. And we want to establish an operating reserve, which is 90 days preferred, 45 days minimum, and that's going to total currently under this fiscal year about $1.3 million. The next one is the capital project reserves. That's defined as 2% of the fixed asset original cost, and that's about $2.4 million. The debt proceeds reserve, that's where if we do bonding, that's where the money that has not been spent is going to actually show up there. In our case, we're going to talk about state revolving loan funds, to where we don't actually get the money like we would a bond. We spend the money, then we get reimbursed. So it doesn't show up here because we're doing SRF loans. So that's one unique thing you'll see here. But as I expand into future years, you will see the number, and I'll explain why, because we're talking about bonding for those years. The next item is emergency reserves, and the financial policy said, you know, we want to keep a minimum of 50 to 75,000 in there. And then the last fiscal policy was system replacement reserves, and that's equal to basically the annual depreciation. So this group right here shows us what our goals are. That's kind of what we want to achieve. And what we have up here is these are the projected reserve amounts. So we said we want to have an operating reserve of about 1.389 million. This current fiscal year, the operating reserve is going to be 694,000. And if you look down here, that shows we're about 50% of our mark. Same thing holds true for the capital project reserves. We should have about 2.4 million. Currently, we're about 1.2 million, and again, that's about 50%. So we have down here, this shows where we're going with our fiscal targets. And if we expand this out, there's the rest of the spreadsheet that you see. And what you see here, let me bring this over a little. What you see here is as the rates go into effect, we get closer and closer to 100% achieving our financial goals, because that's what we wanted to do. What you see up here, we looked at this column here. The 2014 is that's where we're projecting halfway through, a little over halfway through the fiscal year. That's where we're projecting the year to end. This is the year, this column right here is the one that we're going to be focused on. This is what we're going to be asking for approval on, is the third year. This will be the third year of the rates. Right here, 16-17, that's the fourth year of the rates. 17-18, the fifth year of the rates, and then we showed 2 additional years because we tied this into a 5-year capital improvement plan. Those future years are not locked in. Those are just our projections where we're going to go. But the reason we showed them is because when you come down here to the policies, you can see we're at 50% for our operating reserve. We go to 89%, 93%. So we hit 100%. We hit our target on the 5th year of the rates for the operating reserve. We hit our target for the capital project reserves after the 5th year, which is the 5th year is complete. So the end of the 5th year, all the finance comes in. We hit that target, which is you know, we had a phased approach. The same thing goes for the emergency reserves. And you can see emergency reserves we've met all along. I mean, that's a relatively small amount of money. And then the system replacement reserves, that we show about $3.5 million coming in, but there's no minimum reserve amount. When you read the financial policies, it basically says that, you know, we're bringing in the system reinvestment money, but it's going to go back out expensed into capital. And when I show you the capital plan, you'll see where that money's coming from. We broke it out actually into different funding sources so that you could see where the money's coming from. So I just wanted to spend a little time on this and kind of walk you through it because there was a lot of numbers there. This is really what we're asking you to approve. We're saying that we're approving this year, but we recognize that it's a phased-in approach to meeting the financial objectives because it was a 5-year plan. So it's going to take time to build those reserves up. So this is what we're asking. And then the other things that you have in your sheet, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about them, but I wanted to just kind of briefly go over them. You have a fiscal summary that's also attached in your sheet. You know, it talks about, this is a Excel spreadsheet that finance puts together. It looks at what our actuals are this fiscal year, what we estimate it to be, and what we're proposing that it's going to end. It looks at what the change in the budget is, both on a % change and a dollar change. And then the other attachment you have in your file is a budget worksheet. And again, it looks at what prior year actuals were, 2014. It looks at what the adjusted budget is, the current year-to-date actuals, where we are year-to-date, where we think we're going to end up, and then here's the tentative budget. And these two spreadsheets, this is more line item detail. When you scroll through it, it's multiple pages, and it gives you line item detail that helps prepare the big budget that we're asking you to approve. And then the last thing that we included in your package was the 5-year capital plan. And what this is again, we're only focused on this next upcoming fiscal year, but it shows where we're spending the money. It shows where the money's going. And what we did is we broke it out into capital funding by rate revenue, by system reinvestment funding, and by bond proceeds, because each one of those tie into our financial policy, so we kind of wanted to show where the money was coming from. And then with each one of those, on the sewer side, we broke it out into collections, so it's out in the collection system to get it to the treatment plant. We broke it out into collection, treatment, that's at the treatment plant itself, so you can see the line items of the treatment plant. And then the last component of is the reuse. So, we have to get it to the treatment plant, we have to treat it, and then we have to get it out from the treatment plant. So there's a lot of information there, but you can see where the money's going, and then, of course, the fiscal years, 15, 16, 16, 17, and so forth, going out 5 years. So that is what we included for backup material to help, show you where the money's being spent. So going back to the budget model, this is really what we're asking you to approve. We're asking you to approve the third-year budget or make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisor for approval of the third-year budget, recognizing that there'll be a phased approach to meeting those financial objectives. And we meet those financial objectives at the end of the 5th year.
Okay. Committee, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, and I don't know if, David, you can answer this, or Nick, but I do have a question on how you determine out of the operating fund how much to transfer to the capital fund. Are you doing this based on what you want your operating reserve to be, and then the residual goes to is transferred over, or how are you determining this?
Well, we're looking at it based on trying to meet the financial objectives, meaning we're trying to balance what the needs of the system is versus meeting the needs of the budget and the fund. So we're transferring that amount to capital, especially say out of system reinvestment funding. We're transferring that amount to capital to get those items that are complete. We have more items that we need. In fact, on the list, there's more items that have to be done, but they're being pushed out because we want to show that we're still meeting our system reserves.
And then if I may, I have one more question. It is this, on this, your system replacement reserves, and I go back and I look at the financial policy, and that's, in essence, and when I looked at the rate study, that was for repair and replacement. And I went back even to some other minutes of supervisor at the board meetings about how you got into this situation and how you spent your depreciation funds. And as I see this, we at least get it up to 50%, but we're never going to get, we don't show it ever getting to the 100% of what your annual depreciation is. And if I look at the water fund, it's even worse. When we get to that, I'll explain that. So I wish you could explain a little bit more of that to me, because I have a concern about that when this is what got you in trouble in the first place. And it appears like we're climbing out of it, but we're not getting there. Thanks.
Thank you for that question, because I think it's a good question. System reinvestment funding was used just for that, for replacement, for equipment that's failing. And so in the financial policy, it wasn't set that we keep the other amounts. They had an amount. They said, this is what we want to equal. So in this case, we bring in about $3.5 million a year for it, but it is used to fix, I mean, that was part of the rate. It was used to fix the equipment that's currently failing. So we'll talk about the water side in a minute, because I know exactly what you're talking about. We'll get to that one. So when you look at the cash balances, I mean, we're still carrying, quite a healthy cash balance. And so it's a balance between, putting money in a bank versus trying to fix that we need to get fixed right now. Does that answer your question?
Mike, do you have any other questions? on the sewer part?
Yeah, I got a couple more on more of the detail work that you gave us. When I look at the budget preparation worksheet, and on the first page of the 10 for the bit, we showed total, the revenue coming in for FY14 actual is only 3.2 million. And then we budgeted 9.6, and this is on user fees and charges, and we're estimating 9.7 million and then 11. Why is there such a discrepancy between the 14 actuals and the 15 budgeted, estimated, and 16 tentative?
Right, so for the record, Nick Providenti, Finance Director. So the 15, the year-to-date actual amounts are for the first 6 months of the year, I believe. Right, they're through December 31st, basically, so they're not actual as of now.
No, I don't mean if I look at the 14 actuals, you're only stating $3.3 million of total user fees and charges. And then I compare that to 15, where you have 9.7 million estimated.
I don't know.
I'm just
Sherry
wondering
Russell,
what was.
Accounting manager. I'm sorry, I'll answer this. We used to have two funds. We used to have Fund 510, which you're looking at, and then 515 was our capital fund. So that's where the revenue went in 14 and prior. So you're only seeing one fund here. You're not seeing the capital portion. That's why it's so much higher in 15.
And could you give your name again and title for the record?
Sherry Russell, accounting manager.
Thank you. Bruce, I think you had a question?
Yeah, Mike covered one of my questions on the system reserve issue. The other thing I guess I would ask, and I know we'll potentially get to it later, but on the budget preparation worksheets, page 4 of 10, there's about in the middle, there's a line that says water effluent supplement. That's the transfer or projected transfer for the purchase of potable water?
Yes, that is correct, and and thank you for bringing that up, because that's going to tie into the future item that we're going to be talking about, and that's where that money went. So we wanted to show you that line item detail, that it did go into the operating budget. We budgeted, $100,000 for it.
You're just carrying that one step forward, David. The year-to-date actual doesn't have anything there, or the FY15 estimated doesn't have any. We are currently paying, or will be paying, is that correct, from the sewer to the water fund, sewer to the water fund?
Yes, sir, that is correct. We didn't budget for it, so this happened after the budget cycle, but that's the item that's going to be coming up that we'll be discussing, the last item, about that transfer of that money.
Okay, and it still comes out of operating at this point?
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
David, you'd mentioned that bottom line on that first spreadsheet you showed us, system replacement reserve, that percentage it was hovering around 15% on average or so. And you said that was because it was taken out, that money was taken out or shown in the capital replacement. If you were to include that in there, what percentages are we hitting of that target?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Well, I mean, I see that we're, operating reserve, we're at 50%, the emergency reserve, we're at 100%, but the rest of the reserves, we're showing them down in the low double digits. If we were to not take that money out, where would we be hitting on those targets? Are we investing as much capital as we want to, as we plan to?
Yeah, so we are spending that money. I mean, I think we could easily spend every bit of that money and have that as a 0%. We're trying to balance keeping some money in that reserve, having a nice healthy cash balance, versus trying to spend what our needs are. And when you look, to kind of answer that, when you look at one of your attachments, the capital plan,
I guess I could just flip back.
it talks about system reinvestment funding, which is that middle section. And you can see out in some of the outer years, that's where some of the money is going into some of the collection system. You can see some pretty big numbers out here. And that's where we're spending that system reinvestment money out in the system, both in the collection, treatment, and reuse of the plant.
So what we're showing in that Fund 510, the budget of $3.5 million, I'm going back and looking, and we actually have system reinvestment in 15-16 of $13 million. Am I reading that right?
Up here.
Oh, up there. Oh, $3 million right there. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I'd have the accountant show me.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Ray.
David, back on your budget model, referring to the lower portion under the financial stabilization policy, the operating reserve, 90 days, minimum 45, the numbers shown, I'm assuming, are 90?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. They are. The target was 90. We are saying a minimum of 45 would be acceptable, but the target was 90. So those represent 90 days of operating expense.
Mike touched on, I guess, my overall question on this. Are the ratepayers' money, is that coming in as was originally projected?
If you look at the model, you can see that this is what we budgeted for this fiscal year, $9.6 million. And this is what we're projecting, 9.7. So yes, it's very close. And then these numbers out in the future years, or what we're projecting, are very similar to what our model had predicted, yes.
But the actual so far, because last year when we met, we, of course, had no actual to go with, and so, and I will confess to not having pulled last year's budget for comparison, which I should have done. But what we projected last year, have we met that goal?
Yes, Madam Chair, for the record, Nick Providenti, Finance Director. I believe we have. In sewer, it's a little easier to predict because it's really not weather dependent. So we're real confident that the sewer amounts are meeting the goal that was projected by the consultants. I mean, I think that's fair, Sherry, don't you? I mean, Sherry's the one that kind of lives with these numbers, so she knows them a little bit more than we do. So she's nodding her head yes. So I think we're safe with those numbers.
Thank you for indicating the nod for the record. All right. Are there any other questions, or let me ask committee, do you want to make motions as we go along, or do you want to wait till the end of the meeting to make motions on all of these items?
I do.
Oh, Mike?
Yeah, and maybe this is more directed to Nick. It's on this, the supplemental issue again. You're going to bill at year end, on calendar year end, and I realize, is that because of the procedures you developed where you'll transfer the funds back and forth between the water fund and the water fund and the sewer fund? Would it be easier to set that up on a fiscal year to match your revenues and expenditures, Nick, or is it just so insignificant you don't worry about it?
I think that's probably the latter. We'll probably do it. I don't know what we decided to do about last year. Did we?
It's on this agenda. Yeah.
Oh, for last year as well? Oh, okay. Yeah, because apparently that's why we haven't done it. But we can typically do it. It's easier to do it when it actually kind of happens. So it's probably easier to do it, at the end of the summer when it actually happens. We know what the amounts are at that time. It's fresh. We just do a journal entry and make the journal entry. So yeah, cash-wise, there's no problems. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Bruce?
Yeah, a couple things, Madam Chairman. One, I would suggest that unless there's a reason not to, that we consider these items as they're agendized and maybe vote on them at that point. But I do have one other comment. Being hung up on the system replacement reserve, and David, if you could go to the bottom of that chart, the goal after the 5-year window of really beginning to raise that percentage, in my mind, is an important continuing element in terms of the oversight. We've known that it's going to take at least 5 years to see things begin to turn around, and we understand that a lot of the revenue is really going to go right back into the system. But I guess just by way of comment, I'm hoping that as we get further out than the 5th year in our window, that the development and accumulation of those reserves for the system replacement would continue to hopefully get closer to that ultimate 100%. So I just mentioned that in my mind, as I think an important big picture item. I'm not uncomfortable, and I don't think anything that we've done here, heard today, is anything different than what we've talked about before in terms of being on a 5-year path. But I do think that it's important after the 5th year that we don't lose sight of that particular element, because that's the big one in the long term.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Do we have another question? Oh. All right, then, would anyone like to make a motion? Motions are in the packet.
I'll be happy to try here, Madam Chairman. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the sewer fund budget for fiscal year 2016, being consistent with the adopted financial policies, recognizing a phased approach to meeting the policies as developed as part of the rate program, and with the suggestion that we keep years after year 5 in perspective.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second that.
All right. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
No opposed, so it's unanimous. All right, let's move on to item 7 now.
Okay, on item number 7, I'm going to go ahead and just open up the PDF sheets. Oh, maybe I better blow that up.
This is the water fund budget.
This is, yes, thank you. This is the water fund budget, and I won't go through all the detail of this one, breaking it out, because it's the same layout. I just wanted to explain what our approach was. But it's the very same layout, and this is for Fund 520, which is the water budget. Again, we're going to be focusing in on this year right here, the 3rd year, fiscal year 15-16. Going through this, again, we look at the beginning operating cash balance of $1.8 million. Shows obviously what our operating revenues are here for about $15 million. The expenditures are listed here just over $15 million. We still have a net income and net operating ending balance of just under $2 million. Looking on the capital side, we start out with about just under $2.2 million. And looking at everything through connection charges, the bond proceeds, debt issuance costs, we end up with $2.2 million, but we still have the healthy cash balance of about $4.2 million for the water fund budget. Looking at the financial policy side of things, again, this middle column here shows those same 5 policies. The operating reserve, 90-day target, 45-day minimum, shows $2.1 million. Looking at that year, it looks next year it looks like we'll be about $1.9 million, which is 89% of the target. For the capital reserve, $2.3 million will be at about 1.8, so that's 80%. Looking at the debt proceeds, again, the reason there's no debt proceed reserves in there is because the state revolving loan funds, we don't get that. That's money that's reimbursed after we've spent it. So there's nothing listed for that one. For the $75,000 emergency reserve, of course, we do meet that. The whole thing just turned there. I'm not sure what happened.
On both screens, I want you to know.
Sorry about that. I'll get it there.
Looks like the pictures my children send me of my grandchildren sometime.
Technical difficulties. And then the last one again was the system replacement reserves, $3.5 million. And this year we'd be at about 10%. Commissioner Spell, where you were referring to, and I want to address this now, are these two numbers here that show out in the future years. And what had happened was when we put together the plan, we're in the process of updating those future years. As you can see, those years are year 4 and year 5, so they're ways out there. When we put together the capital plan, we had some last-minute changes, and we put this together and didn't catch that. And so basically what we just need to do is we need to reduce the amount of money that we're spending out of that fund to get those numbers back up. But they won't affect the decision today because those are in the future years anyway. But we did catch that, and that was just a miss on our part. We did look at it, and we said instead of submitting late material into making this correction, we'd rather just discuss it, and we can show that in the capital plan when we get to that component. So again, looking at these objectives down here, you can see on the operating reserves, you know, we did hit it here, and then it went down a little bit, but it's coming back up. You know, that's how our funding mechanism, how we're trying to fund certain things to be repaired. But we do hit the reserves. We hit it on the operating side, we hit it on the capital side, we hit it on the emergency reserve side, and then this number we wouldn't have negative, of course. But that's not reflected in the year that you're looking at being approved, which is this year right here, the third year. So sorry about that confusion. With your budget model, again, was the same information that was attached before. It was those various worksheets, the fiscal spreadsheet, and the 5-year capital plan. If you'd like me, I could open those up, go through. If you have any questions on those, I'd be happy to address them.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple questions on the budget. First one is, when I look at the fiscal summary for the enterprise, for the water fund, in 2006, the FY16, our service and supplies jump 18%, and I went and looked at the budget backup for it, and the biggest chunk of that is it was the, let's see, it's on page, I think it was meters, something to do with meters. Yeah, it says it's the water meters and services, where this year it's estimated 165,000 and then 800,000 next year. Do you buy these meters and then inventory them, and then is that what's going to happen here?
Yeah, these are actually replacement meters that we're going to be putting in, okay. And each meter in itself is, I can't remember the exact amount, but it's below what the capital amount is. That's why it ends up being expense to the operating side. So yes, it's part of a replacement program that we had planned. It's just one lump sum that hits.
Okay.
Any other questions?
That was mine. He's answered all my other ones.
Bruce?
Yeah, just, I heard what you said on that system replacement reserve. I think in my mind, at least in a general sense, the sewer system operates a little differently than a water system, and you've got one massive sewer plant that can basically fall apart for a very large replacement cost, as opposed to a huge number of relatively smaller elements in a water system. Not that it isn't expensive to run transmission mains and that sort of thing, but the orders of magnitude are quite different, and I think in many cases the operating lives are significantly longer than programmed or depreciated sometimes in a water system for at least many of the elements. The transmission mains distribution system and that sort of thing. So although I guess I would reiterate my general concern about operating system replacement reserves, and I hear what you said about that's going to be addressed in future budgets because of some late-breaking information that wasn't incorporated when these were printed. I think, in my mind, the water system, although the numbers are bigger in the negative sense, I think there's more ability to manage that in terms of how some of those things are done.
Other questions? Yes.
This is, I guess, this impacts the whole budget if there's going to be a problem. Are we going to have, with the drought, are we going to have water restrictions or anything this year, which, of course, if we do, could possibly impact this whole budget we're looking at?
That's an open-ended question, huh? I mean, obviously, yes, the drought is having an impact, but I think some of the things that we've put in place, as far as the east-west transmission line, is going to help us significantly. So we are currently bringing water from Douglas County, up through. We have the north-south transmission completed. And then this year, what we did is we changed some priority in our SRF loan so that we could do the phases of the east-west, which, as you know, the first phase, because it impacts getting in here, the first east-west phase 2A1 is almost complete. And what we did is we took $2 million of our SRF on line items that were supposed to be completed for like repair and rehab of drinking water lines, and went to the board and said, look, we recognize this drought has impacts, so the sooner that we can get water across town, distribute through the system, the better off we are. So we did that. We got approval to do it so that we can start moving that water that way. So to answer your question, I mean, yes, the drought does have an impact, but we've put things in place that will help minimize what those impacts would be ultimately to the budget.
And let's just clarify a few things. As I understand it, Dave, and we did mention this in the last meeting, Carson City has plenty of water. We're just not able to treat all of the water, for instance, out of well 4. Is that correct?
Yeah, Carson City, in its groundwater, some of the wells have higher levels of various constituents, and so that was the idea of trying to get the water. The best value was to bring the water up from Douglas County to help supplement what we have.
And that's less expensive than the treating of well 4 water, right?
Yes, than treating many of the wells, not just well 4, but yes, than treating many of the other wells, yes.
So what I'm concerned about is where, first of all, let's look at the income we've got from water rate payment. Has that hit what was projected?
Sherry Russell, County Manager, for the record. For 15, we budgeted about 14 million, and we only brought in about 13.5. So again, for those large of numbers, pretty close.
Okay, and of course, that's something that's going to be difficult for us to keep tabs on, since people can turn off the tap whenever they want to, and so, we won't be able to always accurately project that.
Right. And again, Madam Chair, for the record, Nick Providenti, Finance Director. That's why it's important, I think, especially in the water fund, to have that operating reserve up at 90 days, so you can kind of level out the ups and downs of, the weather. And if we get a really, really wet July or August, I know that's probably not going to happen, but, people, obviously will use less water. So, I mean, actually, I don't know, I'm a finance guy, and I understand that we need to, tell people to conserve water, but it's like saying, we don't want to sell you a product that we're giving you, you know what I mean? We're telling you to conserve, so I get conflicted a little bit sometimes, but I understand, so. But anyway, the main point I was trying to make is that the operating reserve, that 90-day operating reserve, is very important, especially in this fund, to balance that out.
If for some reason, well, because we know the seasons are all crazy. The East Coast is having our weather and we're having theirs. And so, let's say things went crazy and all of a sudden we had a ton of water in Carson City. But, well, no, let's take that back. Let's say everybody decided they had a lot of money and decided to put in new lawns and use a lot of water, and you had more money than projected for the water fund. would that excess revenue be spent, or would we move that over into the reserve?
Well, I mean, I guess how I understand it would end up going in the ending fund balance and then be budgeted for the following year. So ultimately, it goes back into the cash pot. And, you know, in that cash pot are where we hold the reserves. I mean, the money's in one pot. So I correct me if I'm wrong on that. I mean, it sits in one pot.
Right. And I think, again, theoretically, if that were to happen, I mean, you know, probably some of the capital requirements would be greater. I mean, we'd need to bring more water, or the pipes would wear out more, and we'd have to spend more of that money theoretically, you know, fixing things. So I think that's, I guess the answer is it just kind of depends. Depends on how the system is, depends on how much money there would be. I can't imagine, I mean, it would be nice, but I can't imagine there would be, I mean, we'd have an excess of money, you know, over and above what we're anticipating in these projections, so.
I guess I'm aiming towards reserve versus expenditure, but,
Right.
you know, that's just me. So let me ask you a question that I've been asked by the public, Dave, that I know the answer. I warned you I was going to ask you this question. Will there ever be a time in Carson City in the future where the water rates will go back to what they once were?
Can I answer that by saying that's a policy decision? You know, I mean, I think when we looked at these rates, and I can speak specific to like the sewer, when we did the sewer, for example, you know, we did a phased approach. We looked at what a new facility would cost. We looked at what rehabbing the facility would cost, and the policy decision was made to implement these with knowing that it's a phased approach, with knowing that the rates would probably have to go up again in the future to continue rehabilitation of the facility. The treatment plant has not been replaced, just the heart of it has been rehabilitated. So there's more costs that are coming down the road, but ultimately, you know, that is a policy decision.
Thank you. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but it's a question I think needed to be asked and answered, so. All right, do we have any other questions that are easier than mine for Dave or anyone else on the staff? Okay, then would anybody like to make a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the water fund budget for fiscal year 2016. It is consistent with the adopted financial policies, recognizing a phased approach to meeting the policies as developed as part of the rate program. And I will add to that the same recommendation Bruce made on the sewer fund, that we do place an emphasis on fully funding depreciation as we move forward.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Bruce seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? None. So it's unanimous. Thank you. All right, now we move on to item 8, which is the stormwater.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you. David Briquetta. The budget model, again, for the stormwater. Let me blow this up a little bit. I'm trying to balance seeing the whole thing versus just the line items, so sorry about that. Again, this is the very same layout as you've seen in sewer and in water. This is the stormwater side of it. The focus for this year was going to be the fiscal year 15, third year. You know, going through again, that one of the unique things you'll see in the stormwater is it's a much smaller fund. I mean, some of the line items in sewer and water in itself, a single line item is bigger than this entire fund. So one of the challenges that we're going to have, and we can jump right down to it, I mean, instead of going through each of the numbers up top, I'd like to just jump right down here into the fiscal policies. Because when you look at trying to meet some of these fiscal policies with this fund, we're not going to be able to meet the financial policies for really two reasons on this. And the first is When we did the 5-year rate plan, we did a 5-year rate plan for water and for sewer, but it was only a 1-year increase for the stormwater. So, but it kind of got lumped into this. So it got put under the same umbrella, but there weren't 5 years of rate increases. So trying to meet some of these financial policies, again, with 100% will be difficult. And the second item is, because this fund is so small, trying to keep some of these depreciation values. We did some rough estimates, and rates would double to triple in order to meet the financial policies. So, it's going to be difficult for this fund to be able to get to that without having significant increases. One of the things that we did look at, again, this year, I just want to focus, we're just looking at fiscal year 15-16, but looking into the future years, and especially looking at some of the capital plan that we submitted, there's going to need to be rate increases in the stormwater in order to fund these projects. This fiscal year, this upcoming fiscal year we're approving, we're not proposing any rate increases, and that's where the focus is. But as we do our planning, that we do expect that there'll be rate increases, or at least a discussion of rate increases, to be able to fund some of the capital. And when you look at these cash balances and cash reserve, carrying $600 forward, it's just too small in order to get any of the capital done. So I don't want to get tied up in too much of that detail, because that'll be another discussion, but know that when we looked at a 5-year plan, we're only focusing in on this 3rd year, but when we looked at the 5-year plan, we did put like a 50 cents rate increase each year to try and fund what's needed for this capital improvement plan. In your package is the capital improvement plan, and these are the items that we feel are very important to get done, but we'll have that discussion as those years come up. But this year, on the 3rd year, we're not talking about rate increases. So looking at the goals, you can see like operating reserves, we're about 50%. It does go to 83%, and actually at the end of the 5th year, it goes up to 100%. The capital project reserves goes to 115%. We just, looking at the emergency reserve in the 50 to 75,000, that's as big as some of the carryover, bigger than we're doing. That's why it's so difficult in a small fund. So it's not realistic to carry that. And the system reinvestment, the annual depreciation, again, is 0. And one of the unique things about a stormwater fund is stormwater is much different than a water plant or a sewer plant. You don't have the pumps, you don't have the equipment. You have conveyance systems. It's different. It's a different type of a fund. So I think in the recommended board action to the supervisor, we're asking for approval of next year's budget, but there is a recognition that it doesn't meet the financial policies set forth.
Any questions? Bruce?
Yeah, storm drainage is a funny thing, and not especially popular until you have a flood. There's just a huge amount of unfunded storm drainage needs you could point to around town. And I think the reality is you can't get to them all, and you probably can't afford to try to get to them all. And so it is a little different kind of animal, the way I see it. I think it merits comment to the Board of Supervisors that the emergency reserve and the system replacement reserve at 0 is probably not a good thing going forward. But on the other hand, there's a true balance in the service you get or you're willing to pay for versus what you can afford to do. And when you have major runoff, you're going to have problems. And you try to minimize it. You try to use as much as you can, put your money in the best possible place. I do see that out in 2019, 2020, it looks like we're going to be borrowing some money, and I would imagine some significant capital investments at that point in time. But I do think we have to treat it slightly differently, even though as an oversight committee, we probably need to make a note for the board that we are deficient, we don't meet the standard with respect to both the current and the projected.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? There being none, do I hear a motion?
I guess I walked myself into that one. I would move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the Stormwater Fund budget for fiscal year 2016. The committee recognizes it is not consistent with the adopted financial policies because the one-time rate increase was not developed to meet the financial policies. I would add that the committee also understands that in storm drainage, striking a balance between the revenues and the maximum service that you might provide is difficult, and there's a lot of policy in there. And so with that, I guess that would be my motion.
Thank you. Randy?
I second Bruce's motion.
All right, we have a second. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. It's unanimous. And Kathy, you got all that on the motion there. Okay, thank you.
Please clean it up for me, Kathy.
So now we'll move on to item 9, which is review and discussion of domestic water supplementation. We're talking about supplemented potable water going to the golf courses, et cetera, et cetera. Dave?
So this really is a continuation of the similar agenda item got brought forth last time, and what we decided to do is discuss it at this one because the reason it really comes in front of you is because it impacts the budget. So you saw the line item in the sewer for $100,000, and we're saying that we're going to need to supplement the domestic water. We're going to need to supplement the reclaimed water with domestic water to meet the needs of the users. So looking at last calendar year, we supplemented with about just a little over 100 million gallons of domestic water. And that was using the rates that we pay the water from Douglas County because where the water is being used mainly comes from Douglas County. So we're saying that there'll be a transfer of $71,800 from the sewer fund to the water fund. That wasn't budgeted for last year, but that's what we would do this year. And then next year we put in a $100,000 line item to be able to make that fund transfer. And the recommendation that we have is that this is going to continue. And in your packet, and I know that's a big packet, and I appreciate all your inkjet cartridges. You probably went through printing that out. There's a lot of information in there. We've had this discussion at length last year with the Board of Supervisors and, how we're going to handle this shortage. And there's so many variables in this with, weather and all kinds of other variables, but we do expect that there's going to be a shortage for a period of time that we're going to have to supplement with domestic water. So we're asking that we have a approved action plan in what we do, and then we're asking that we go ahead and every year supplement with domestic water to be able to meet the needs of the reclaimed water system, hope that the rain comes back, and then in here it talks about the funding source. We'd use the interlocal agreement because that will go up over a period of years, so it will ultimately hit the operating expense. As we pay more money for the water from Douglas County, there'll be an increase in this, and we still think it's going to be about the same neighborhood as it's been. This year, on our reclaimed water side, we're looking very similar to we did last year. Our storage levels are almost identical to where we were last year, so we expect to be supplementing here starting very soon, and the supplementation will probably be very similar to what it was last year. Last year I said we used a little over 100 million gallons, and we almost ran out again in September. So we'll be in a very similar situation.
Actually, didn't we start earlier this year because of the drought? So it could be more?
It could. There could be some more. I mean, because it was so dry, what we are seeing is usage this year is started a little bit earlier. We're starting to see the usage in January and February more than what we saw last year in January and February. But our storage reservoir, we had some carryover from last year, so it's what's really coming out of the back end of the plant and what is stored in the reservoir, and that's about the same as last year. So we should be in approximately the same position.
So I heard in the audit that actually it came to more like $91,000, not so much the $71,000, that it was a little bit more than what we've been hearing.
Well, the 71,000 is just the calculated value from the interlocal agreement. That's what we were paying Douglas County for their water. In your packet, and I know that packet was big, was the interlocal agreement that we had. So it's just taking the 104.57 million gallons times that amount and 68 cents, 69 cents. I'd have to look exactly what it was. But that's how we came up with the 71,000.
That's why you rounded it off to the 100,000. That way it would cover.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So there could be some slight rounding differences.
So right now, by putting it a line item in there, the ratepayers are paying for this water right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The sewer ratepayers, yes.
Okay. I think when you missed this meeting that we had last June, and I'm talking to Mr. West. That's right, Bennett. At that time, I think what the committee voted was that in the future, the recipients of the water should be paying for it. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Guess I'm right. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct, but I believe it was the Board of Supervisors that asked us to go down this route.
I'm sorry, I missed that meeting then.
Well, I don't recall that exactly what we determined, but I know there was concern expressed, and that was, in my mind, in relation to part of the discussion about connection fees, with the idea, and we, in our last meeting, worked through the connection fee issue, which would provide some potential revenues going forward to help offset things such as this, or at least allow a possible source of revenue that wouldn't come from the ratepayers for this. And I know we talked about it, but I don't recall how specific we were in recommending, other than recognizing that the ratepayers are paying for it, recommending that the supplementing of the sewer effluent was a requirement because the commitment of delivering water to the golf courses was determined, as I understand it, to be a policy of the board that they wanted to maintain.
Yes, Randy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would, honestly, my recollection was that it was discussed, but the actual source of the revenue was not identified. It was a subject to be discussed later, and here we are.
That's what I recall also, but again, I could be wrong.
Well, we did talk about the fact that there was money in operating revenues so that it didn't have to come out of a reserve or something, but that was potentially subject to review this year.
Right. So, all right, so let me ask you this, Dave. With the $100,000 going to potable water for, and it isn't just the golf courses, it's also the prison farm, I believe, and, there's some other things. What is it that wouldn't get done, for instance? If you had that $100,000 instead of spending it on potable water, is there something that could have gotten done that won't get done?
Thinking how to answer that question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's things that won't get done, but relatively speaking, it's a fairly large fund, and so $100,000 out of that fund is relatively minimal. So it does impact it. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay and say it wouldn't have an impact, but the impact is relatively small.
All right, and I know that there are some, we know that, for instance, Dwight Millard has declared bankruptcy, and so that has tied up his golf course in such a way that things are a little more challenging, shall we say, than they might have been. And so we know that the board is faced with some, I use the word again, challenges as far as collecting money for the potable water and so forth. So I actually think Bruce has a fine idea as far as the sewer hookups, the water hookups, and designating some of the income perhaps, which the board still has to talk about, hasn't been done yet, but some of that could be used to supplement this so that the ratepayers don't feel they're necessarily paying for it.
Madam Chair, if I may, I think, I certainly see your point that it could be viewed that supplementing water that goes to the golf course is being paid for by the ratepayers, but I take a little bit of a different viewpoint on that, and that is if we didn't have a location to dispose of that effluent water, we as ratepayers would be paying a much higher rate to treat our water to a higher treatment standard so we could dispose of it in a way different than taking it to a golf course. So because we can't quite get those volumes to balance perfectly, and there is got to be some exchange of cash, I guess, from one fund to another, I mean, I see this as change, if you will, from that money we've already paid in, or saved, I guess I should say. So I look at it a little differently, and I guess I'm not as concerned of trying to find another revenue source. I think we've been reaping a savings all along, and this is just the balance due back from that savings.
And you are, of course, correct. I mean, in the beginning, we were desperate to find places to put the effluent, and we were glad to have some place to dispose of it. The fact that we don't have the effluent now is more an act of God, I think, than certainly it's not the city's plan, it's not anybody's fault. It's just one of those things that happens. And so I don't disagree with you at all on that. All right, is there any other comment, Bruce?
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could, I recognize the variability of what's available for sewer effluent reuse. But it strikes me as that variability is, the downside of that variability is borne by Carson City as opposed to the users. Dave, do you know the age of the agreements that are in place with the sewer effluent users?
I don't know offhand in what year they were approved. I know, there was an order, a priority order, and they were approved. But I do know we also looked at, and not all of the agreements, but a lot of the agreements, we have longer-term commitments so that it helps stabilize our financial situation so that we have a place to put the effluent. And so some of these are 20 and 40-year renewal periods. So I don't have those exact dates, but I know that we're in those windows, and they're pretty big windows.
Okay, the main reason I was asking that is if the conditions in the environment within which those agreements were put together are relevant now, and if with the risk of lower volumes of sewer effluent reuse, is it appropriate for a sharing of that risk or a shifting of the risk whenever the flow is not what it was expected to be? I'm not sure if I accurately describe what the options are, but more of a sharing of the risk as opposed to a shifting.
I can tell you that the agreements originally were drawn up around 1982 in that period, because I was with the Builders Association back then, and that's when we got all of this, the bond issue passed and everything brought about, and the agreements were being made between, it was Dwight Millard and Ed Ferguson and Rich Mason who put this all together, and that's when those agreements were being made one-on-one as far as disposing of the effluent. Since that time, the last time I researched it, those agreements have been renewed over and over again through the years. So with very little change, as I recall, and it's been a while since I went through and read all of the agreements. Other than that, I think possibly what you're asking is a legal question, and so I'm not sure that Dave can answer that. So, Mr. Ward, would you like to chime in?
Joe Ward from the DA's office. Actually, that's correct. I think Member Bowling's question, is one that begs the question whether it would be, in light of current circumstances, beneficial to reform contracts. And to do a reformation of the contracts, you may eventually need some court intervention. The chair pointed out, too, that the number 2 user started out with Darling Ranch, now Empire Ranch Golf Course, is in bankruptcy, and that makes the complexion a little bit more difficult. And depending on how things get resolved, one way or the other, in that related matter, may create some additional wrinkles, assuming we ever get to the point where you can sit down at a bargaining table and attempt to negotiate reformation given the change in circumstances. I know that's an awfully rambling way to answer the question, but it is very complex, and the chair is correct that the agreements have been in place for a long time and substantially remain unchanged.
Dave, did you want, I'm sorry. Bruce?
I was just going to observe a couple things. One, although I think it's very much of interest, I think our oversight really is related more to the budget side. I do know that Public Works is looking at all kinds of different ways to minimize that amount of freshwater transfer. And some of those things are in some of the backup materials, or some of the alternatives are in some of the backup materials. But I guess my thought would be, although it's very much of interest, there's, as Mr. Ward just said, there's an awful lot of moving parts. I'm thinking we should focus on our immediate action at hand, recognizing that the city is obviously trying to get to the bottom of this in a lot of different ways.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, then do I hear a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that Public Works continue to supplement the reclaimed water system with domestic water until the reclaimed water supply can meet the demands. Transfer the cost of domestic water from the sewer fund to the water fund annually, and use the First Amendment to the interlocal agreement relating to water service between Douglas County and Carson City to determine the cost of the water.
Second.
All in favor say, any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous, none opposed. All right. Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing none, I want to bring up just one thing. I'll bring it up under public comment. In your packets have been, I think every time, this report, an excellent report, having to do with the affluent. And Dave, do you want to make a comment about that for us, please, explaining why we've been getting it with every meeting?
Well, okay, that report was just a continuation. I mean, that was an internal memo that, we wrote internally, and then that memo, along with all that attached information, kind of shows the history of it. And so I think the suggestion I got was, instead of having to put that in and, run everyone's printer down, that we would make a reference to it. if this came back up again instead of having to send out the whole packet.
Right, and this also is something that affects the water rates, right? Which we didn't bring up when we were talking about water rates, but the future,
I'm sorry.
the future plans for what we're going to have to do for effluent and treating it in the future and so forth.
Well, I think it has more of an impact on the sewer side than the water side. But because, you saw in the capital plan on the sewer that it included, the reuse side of it, which that's what it is, and maintaining that infrastructure. So, yes.
Okay. That being said, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Favors, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous.